What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. A little bit recently, Riot has made some seemingly minor changes that resulted in a champion that many saw as fairly difficult become reasonably easier to play. Maybe it didn't happen on the most recent patch, but there's multiple examples of this happening throughout Season 6. And it brings up the question, why is Riot making champions easier to play? Real quick, here's some of my favorite comments from a previous video where I asked what you guys thought about Azir. For a chance to be featured in a future video, leave a comment about what champion you wish was easier to play or maybe harder to play. Anyways, let's get started. The most recent examples of this occurring involves the patch 6.3 change to Alistar and the patch 6.2 change to Cassiopeia, as well as kind of the patch 5.12 change to Ryze a while back. With Alistar, they made it so that when you pulverize during a headbutt, the pulverize would instantly land on a rival, making it so that his pulverize headbutt combo is a lot easier to land. And with Ryze and Cassiopeia, they made it so that casting certain abilities no longer cancels your movement commands, to make it easier to kite around with them. In all the cases, the champion became reasonably easier to play, especially for players with poor mechanical skill. Now, these changes were made due to inherent problems that those champions have in their kits, essentially being too hard to play mechanically for what their abilities are trying to accomplish. This resulted in those champions being impossible to balance for both solo queue and competitive play. And these changes were made as a way to make those champions more balanced as a whole across both spectrums. The past has shown that Riot takes both competitive and solo queue to some extent into account when deciding what changes to make to champions. I don't think you can make the argument that Riot balances only for competitive play or only for solo queue. They definitely care about both, and this change is attempting to address that notion and make those champions stronger in solo queue without making them more powerful in competitive play, since they were already viable at that level, since the skill level of the players there is much higher. And those three champions in specific were examples of champions who were in their prime, broken in competitive play, but had incredibly low win rates in solo queue for how good they actually were at the highest level. The low win rate was generally just because people weren't good enough at playing them, and the champions were just too difficult for the average player. They were overpowered in competitive play, but honestly kind of sucked in solo queue, and that made them really hard to balance, especially when it came to nerfing them. In addition, with those types of champions, if the mechanics are too difficult, they become unplayable if you have high ping. Alistar combos were incredibly ping reliant, and if you had more than 80 or maybe 100 ping, he was almost impossible to play. And the specific changes to those three champions did a great job of helping out high ping players. Now, how much Riot takes the high ping audience into account, it's hard to say, but I can say that a vast amount, easily a few million if not more players, play with ping above 80 to 100. So it is a very real audience, although it's definitely not the main reason for those changes and might not even be taken into account, honestly. It's just a group of people who do benefit a lot from these changes. But what these changes did do is that it's Riot's way of buffing those hard to play champions in solo queue without buffing them very much or even at all in competitive play. It makes those champions easier to balance as a whole in the eyes of Riot, and a lot more friendly to pick up for solo queuers. And after they address that problem, it becomes much easier to nerf or buff those champions based on what they want those champions to do, since they no longer have to worry as much about making those champions unplayable in solo queue, while they're completely broken in competitive play or vice versa. These champions just could not be fairly balanced in competitive play without making them completely unplayable for solo queue, and this type of balancing helps Riot address that inherent problem and leads to champions that are viable in both competitive play and in solo queue, which is great. But personally, I'm not sure if I agree with all of these changes. It's a little bit hard to say, and I'm kind of on the fence. Difficult champions are one of the most interesting and exciting aspects of a MOBA in terms of gameplay for a lot of people. A champion being more difficult to play often makes them have a lot more options and thus more outplay potential, which for a lot of people makes them a lot more fun, and is also a great element of gameplay to have in a game like League of Legends. The game needs difficult champions, just how the game needs easy champions, to create a better gameplay experience for everyone. With Cassiopeia specifically, I think the change to her was honestly great. The reason why is because in making her easier to play in the way that they did, it also accomplished what making a champion hard to play normally should, which is to give them more options and more outplay potential. By no longer having to worry about kiting properly, you could focus a lot more on dodging skill shots, landing your skill shots, and microing your poison. Although this change made Cassiopeia easier to play, undoubtedly, it doesn't even come close to making her an easy champion. She still has a ridiculous amount of mechanical skill needed to do well with her, and a ton of things to worry about. But with this change, they made Cassiopeia easier to play and gave her more outplay potential by allowing you to focus on other mechanics instead of direct kiting. And Cassiopeia, in my eyes, is one of the most interesting and complex champions League of Legends has to offer, and that was kept intact with this change for sure. And the Rise change wasn't too far off from the same thing Cassiopeia was trying to accomplish. I guess it just comes down to kiting being a mechanic that shouldn't really exist, or at least should be a lot easier in a sustained DPS caster who wants to land skill shots and also micro some part of their kit, which I do think is pretty reasonable. As for Alistar specifically, Riot's goal was that they wanted players not to worry about whether or not they could use the combo, but whether or not they should. Now, I'm not sure how much I actually agree with that reasoning. I mean, when you play Alistar, it's like you almost always should be using the combo. It's like a short-range Malphite ultimate. It's an incredibly powerful ability, and it was the main element of skill that you needed to play Alistar. It doesn't really give him more or less options since he never really had too many to begin with. Alistar is a great champion, and the difficulty of this mechanic certainly wasn't on the level of Cassiopeia, but again, I'm really just on the fence about this change. I don't really think it was bad, I'm just not entirely sold on if it was good or not. But overall, I'm really interested to see if this trend of making champions easier to play is going to continue. Who knows what champions it will affect in the future. And that's just about it. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you didn't hit the dislike, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.